done by an agency called LocalCricles. Now, the same survey says that there are lingering concerns over surging prices of essential items and unemployment. This survey has a database of 64,000 people, and the same survey found the popularity of the Modi government at 51%, right bang smack in the middle of the pandemic. But in the latest round, the survey says that the government has met or exceeded expectations in the second term. Now, the question is, what really is keeping the Modi government popular? We've had a tough 3 years, and governments around the world have seen their popularity dip because of the impact that people suffered from COVID-19. Many people lost their jobs, people lost their family members, and it was a tough time overall. Right now, we're in the middle of high inflation, which is going to impact growth as well. Yet, the popularity of the Modi government continues to surge. We're trying to understand why this evening. Madhavan Narayanan, senior journalist, is joining us on the show. Dhiraj Nayar, chief economist Vedanta, is speaking with us. Mythili Bhusnurmath, consulting editor, ET Now, joins us, as does Arun Kumar, retired professor of economics at the JNU. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us today. Professor Arun Kumar, let me begin, with your take on the basic question we've asked. We'll start with the survey, but we'll also move on to what the government has achieved and what it could have done better in the last 8 years. So let me begin with your take on why you think that the Modi government's popularity has been maintained and improved, at least as per this one survey, over the last 8 years and even after the pandemic.
So, popularity is a very nebulous term, It's very multidimensional. You have, social, political, economic factors, not just economic factors. And you can play around with socio-political factors, to overcome the economic, problems that may be faced by the people. And I think, Mr. Modi is a very good communicator. He communicates very well with the public. So whatever is done, he's able to communicate that, which is not the case with other opposition leaders who are not able to communicate the problems that have been faced. Now, when you get to, apart from the socio-political factors, the economic factors, the question is, from whose point of view are you asking? If you're asking from the point of view of the organized sector, which has done very well, if you look at the RBI's survey of 1,500 companies, profits have been surging 24%, so they'll be doing well. There are sectors in the organized sector that are doing very well. But if you ask the unorganized sector, they're not doing very well. They'd be very dissatisfied with what's happening. Then, as we've seen, the farmers were protesting, the workers were protesting, youth has been protesting for jobs, as your report says. So those would be the segments that would argue that, things are not going very well for them. But, as I said, if you are a popular leader, you can turn the narrative. You can use factors which appeal to the base instinct of people, and you can use that to become very popular. Right. You can see, for instance, in Sri Lanka, the Rajapakshas came with a thumping majority on the basis of the divide that they created, and within a year and a half or so, now they become very unpopular. People want them to go. So these factors of popularity can be overcome by various factors, very quickly. So I would say that it's a very nebulous kind of a term.
So a couple of things that Professor has said. One, he has said that this popularity could be for more reasons than economic factors. He's also said that it could be transient. But Dhiraj Nayar, if I were to ask you whether 8 years is a good enough time, and also how do you gauge popularity? Professor said it's very nebulous. So we have this one survey, but forget about the survey for a minute. We also have multitude of elections, right? State elections, central elections, which I think would be the most effective and vast sample size to look at. Is that giving you a sense that this government is seeing an upward trajectory even in its 8th year, which is unusual for Indian politics, isn't it?
It's unusual for Indian politics, but it's not unusual for Mr. Modi. I mean, if you remember, in Gujarat, he had a long run, winning 3 elections, and would have possibly won more had he stayed. So I think there is something about Mr. Modi, the politician, which helps him endure his popularity with the masses at large. So in terms of unusuality, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's unusual for Mr. Modi. But I think fundamentally, if I was to say why he's so popular, I would say it's two things. One is what he's done in terms of, and here I would like to focus on the welfare measures. So, even through the toughest of times, and admittedly, the COVID period was not the finest hour of the government, but the fact is that, certain benefits, whether it was free food, free rations, the earlier schemes of direct transfers to farmers of 6,000 rupees, whether you talk about the gas cylinder, the Awas Yojana with housing, there's a lot of benefits which have percolated down to the most needy sections of society. So even while things have not been great on the overall economic front, I think the majority of India's people have benefited a great deal from the delivery of welfare service. That's one. That's what he has done, and that's what they see, which previous governments had not managed. They had spent a lot on welfare, but it had not reached the people. And the second thing is what has not happened, what they have not seen. They have not seen any big scandals or corruption scandals or any other scandals of the type they were used to seeing with previous governments. So I think that, so they believe that whatever he's doing, Mr. Modi as PM, his intent is good. And that he's trying to work for the people. He may not always succeed, may not always come out on top, but he's not in it for himself. And
okay, so the image that he's trying, okay, that's interesting.
They trust him.
That's interesting.
Trust is very important.
Trust so and intent, belief in
even when he
intent.
Doesn't succeed, they don't believe he's got malified intent.
Okay, so belief in intent, but nevertheless, we also must, judge this performance parameter on what has actually been done. So, Mythili, let me come to you on this point. And also, keeping in account that COVID-19 happened, it hit countries all over the world, how India has fared and where we stand now in terms of growth with a bit of an issue, inflation, a big problem. Do these land up at the government's door or not? Or is this something that could have happened to any government and they tried the best they could?
Well, COVID and inflation, I think, are universal concerns. They affected every country. COVID, yes, for the past 2 years, there's not a single country which really escaped. And inflation now, we're seeing there's not a single country again, which is immune from inflation. So I think these two things cannot really be attributed to the Modi government, though perhaps the policies pursued by the RBI, like with all central banks, contributed. But to my mind, and as Arun said, I would agree with him that popularity is very difficult to define and to put, into narrow compartments. So the popularity of the Modi government, and I'm going to comment only on the economic performance of the government. And there, I think it would be wrong to compare growth rates, because economists and observers frequently compare the growth rates under the UPA with the growth under the Modi government, the first term, the second term. Now, growth rates can be very misleading because it depends on the base, it depends on so many other factors. And we did see a change in the Modi government's biggest achievement. I'd agree with Dhiraj, is that in creating a state which actually delivered to a large extent on the welfare promises it made. And further, I think the biggest contribution to my mind, which I think very few people have really noticed perhaps, is that they put in place a plumbing. They address the nuts and bolts of the macroeconomic framework. So whether it's through smart use of technology and combined with the determination to pursue their goals. So you saw digitization, you saw the insolvency and bankruptcy code, you saw GST, all of this which made it possible, things like Jan Dhan Yojana, direct benefit transfers became possible, faceless assessment of taxation. So I think they've created a framework on which you could build for the future. And that, to my mind, is the biggest achievement because they've created the wherewithal. So growth rates may fall, they may rise, but this, to my mind, is the biggest achievement. That may not directly have contributed to his popularity. The popularity, I think, from the point of view, economic performance is, I think, as Dhiraj said, in being able to deliver on the welfare schemes, particularly as far as women are concerned, whether it is, gas connections, light, whether it is ability to, for children, girl children. These are the kind of things that ensuring that these welfare measures actually reach the people. May not be entirely, it can never be 100%. And despite the initial fumbles in COVID, and yes, there were many fumbles, finally, they did manage to get the vaccination program rolled out. COVID was a great app. So I think all these things have made people forget about the fumbles in COVID times and focus on what the Modi government has delivered.
Madhavan, do you think it is economic performance or it is the way, and how the uncanny ability of the BJP to capture the political pulse, which has really helped? Or is it a combination of both? Because saying that the BJP has marketed well or that, there are some social issues which have kept people interested, would be denying the everyday impact of the economy, of the real world on Indians, which they've also experienced, obviously.
Tamanna, let me first say a very broad yes to all that you've said, but let me focus on certain things that the other panelists have already said and build on it, because they haven't got the grip of what I think is very important. First of all, let me begin by saying that in India, in the US, there is a saying, it's the economy stupid. In India, I would say it's not the economy stupid. I think the Congress party emphasizes too much on the economy, not realizing that because of the Congress party's own good performance in poverty alleviation, India has moved beyond the framework of extreme poverty into what I call post-absolute poverty, into a relative poverty matrix. And what Modi has done is to craft a new kind of welfare agenda based on Swachh Bharat, gas cylinder. This is not about food grains for the poor anymore. It is tap water. It is about gas cylinder. He has created what I call a neo-poverty populism and tried to deliver on it. That is one thing that is working on the economic front. Having said that, let me say it's not just about the economy. People, economists who are studying data don't get it. There is something called human charisma. When I move my hand like this, it is different from saying this with my hands tight in front of you on the same TV screen. I may be saying the same thing. People have connect to chemistry, and Modi has a lot of it. Let's admit it.
1 minute. I want to just throw that open. I know, Madhavan, you want to finish, but I want to throw that open. Are you putting it down to the chemistry, the oratory skills of the leader?
I can list you 10 factors, all of which go into making the Modi. In the US, they have a system called the 7 keys to measure who's going to be the next president. That includes the economy as one of the factors, but it's not the only one. So it includes half-term polls and, So Modi has a marketing engine, let's face it, an IT cell, let's face it, the way he dresses. And Prashant Kishore recently made a brilliant observation that what the urban middle class likes to criticize of Modi going around the world sends to the rural voter a message that he is a charismatic global leader, and that some of it rubs off on them. India's whenever the country goes out of extreme poverty, a certain kind of nationalism builds up. And worldwide, there is a movement for charismatic leaders, whether it's Zelensky, who's having a war with Putin, both of them have charisma. Erdogan has charisma. So people, middle class, urban, especially highly educated people have no idea how charisma works. I can give you a separate white paper on it.
Okay, so it's charisma. One sec, let's to come on to that point. You're saying it's charisma. Dhiraj Nayar, he's saying it's Modi's personal charisma. What about things like demonetization, bringing in GST, the decision to bring in a lockdown, and the impact it had on people's lives? Can charisma negate all of that?
No, that's what I said. It's not. I said in my first intervention, it's not just charisma; it's also trust. That you've had 4 major disruptions in 8 years, which is probably a lesser politician would have fallen by now. I mean, you had demonetization, you had GST in the first term, and the second term you've had the pandemic, and now you have the Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, some of it, of course, is induced by the government, some of it is not. But the fact is that through all of this, the trust has not broken. Right? I mean, any of these, the first 2 in particular, demonetization itself, if people really believed that it was an utter failure and the intent was all wrong and it was to help rich people, then the trust would have broken at the very start, but it has not, right? So it's charisma and it's also trust. He is one of them as well. You have to also understand that he's one of the first prime ministers who comes from, that kind of background, lower middle class, possibly even lower than lower middle class, where he started life. He's a self-made man. No connections, no family, no dynasty. So he also stands out, when compared with some of our other opposition, not only Congress, but a lot of other parties are basically family-run parties where, fathers, sons, daughters are running the show. And he, again, and I agree with Madhavan, in a post-poverty, post-absolute poverty India, this concept of merit, being self-made, all these, it's much less feudal. So people don't look up to him as a feudal leader. People look up to him as India's first 21st century prime minister, who came from being one of them and is trying his best for one of them. Now, we can debate to eternity, how well he has done or how badly he has done in terms of economic record. But I think that fact is, unshakable, that there is a great trust and a great attraction to his charisma. Yes, but there have been a lot of charismatic politicians who are not trusted, but he is also trusted. And I think that trust continues, which is why, his popularity remains high. Otherwise, you would have seen it fall.
Okay, so you talked about 4 major disruptions. Mythili, I want to talk about 2 of them, demonetization and the implementation of GST and the initial teething troubles it took. Do you think people have accepted it in this frame of mind, that at least the intent was good, the purpose was good, whether it actually achieved what was set out to be or what is set out to do or not, may be secondary?
Well, Tamanna, it all depends on who you ask. If you ask a student in JNU, he'll tell you how terrible demonetization was, how it was only a populist stunt. Similarly, how GST point to all the flaws. But you ask somebody maybe in Madhya Pradesh or in the interior parts of Uttar Pradesh, he'll give you a completely different answer. So as in India, as I said, there's no one India. There's so many Indias and within one India. So I think it all depends on whom you ask. But let me take GST, for instance. Yes, there were numerous glitches. It is a work in progress. But remember, this was something that governments have been attempting for many, many years. The Modi government had the courage to do it. They signed this big contract, as it were, with the state governments. It was the first truly federal, fiscal federalism. We got all the state governments involved, and today we are seeing the benefits. Yes, there were a lot of teething troubles. Even now, you could say the rates are not particularly rational, but it was a beginning, and they pursued it. And I think we are seeing the results now. It is the entire multiplicity of tax rates, is greater transparency, and we're seeing it in the revenue returns also. As far as demonetization is concerned, I think the jury is still out. Yes, again, you could argue that it was the elections in UP that were forthcoming, that was the main driver. But let's not forget that but for demonetization, the kind of digitization move that we saw pre-COVID might not have happened. So it's a little bit like the French Revolution and what Chow Lai supposedly said, that we still can't see the effects as yet. So similarly with demonetization, maybe one does not know in the long run whether it was a net plus or a net minus. Yes, and there were many things that were wrong with it, especially in the execution. But as far as GST is concerned, I think the answer has to be an unqualified yes. There are still many things that need to be set right, but by and large, it has been a success. On demonetization, as I said, the jury is still out. There was an enormous push to digitization, which helped enormously in COVID. But yes, there was a great deal of disruption, a great deal of the trouble, particularly in the unorganized sector, could have been avoided. It could have been handled better, as could COVID. But at least in the case of COVID, government learned from its mistakes. In demonetization, I think it did not quite learn from its mistakes.
Professor Arun Kumar, just your word on what next? Now, we've talked about the major 4 or 5 disruptions that India and the Modi government at the helm running the country have faced. We're facing continuing disruptions right now. The Ukraine-Russia war has not ended. We don't know when it will. We don't know how long the world will take to recover from the impact of not just COVID-19, but even sky-high inflation, decades-high inflation. Do you think that the strategy as far as India is clear under the Modi government?
So, just to step back a little, the Modi government has not used either demonetization as GST in the elections after the UP election, So it's not something that they're tom-tomming as a great, thing that they have done. So I think from the point of popularity, which is where we began, second point is the price survey that came out, in late January, early February, suggested that the bottom 60% lost incomes after demonetization from 2015-16 to 2020-21. Now that means large number of people are pushed below poverty line, and CMI said that 230 million people were pushed below poverty line. Now, in spite of that, if you have popularity, it means the economic factors are not the main factors that determine people's perception about them. Now, as the question that you asked about going forward, you see, as far as I can see, the Ukraine war is not going to end soon. And it's leading to a new Cold War, not a new Cold War between two, ideologies, but two, strategic groups, which are looking for world domination. One headed by USA, the other headed by China, Russia, and India is getting squeezed in between. So at some point, it might give India a little bit of leeway, but what it will do is it will create 2 circles of, technology, 2 circles of finance, and 2 circles of, trade. Now that will lead to greater supply bottlenecks. And as supply bottlenecks increase, I think inflation would continue to be quite high. So I think the future portents are not very good. Also, the pandemic, is not yet over. China had a huge lockdown, which created huge supply bottlenecks, which created problems. And that also created problems for shipping. So as you know, the container shortage was there, and therefore shipping charges increased dramatically, which led to greater, inflation. So the problems of, availability of raw materials like metals and energy, which are feeding into price increases. Now, this kind of situation, given that we are running into large current account deficit because of the rise of import bill, the export bill is not rising as much, and the devaluation of the rupee that's likely to take place, this kind of inflation will feed in. Plus, there'll be a greater deficit in the budget. Yes. Because if the economy slows down and the world economy goes into a recession, then, our growth will also slow down. Tax collections will be less, but expenditures will rise. Subsidies and other such expenditures will rise. So therefore, there'll be this twin deficit problem, the kind that Sri Lanka faced. We're not in the same position as Sri Lanka, because their foreign exchange reserves are down to $50 million. Yes. Ours are still up $690 billion. So we are not in the same position, but we're headed in that direction given the twin deficits. So, the economic situation is going to remain quite difficult for us in the coming foreseeable future.
And important to see how this is managed going ahead. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. We're talking about India's economy, and which is why we must